No one knows how long the '61 Impala has been rusting in peace out in a field before we rescued it. This thing's been laying around here for almost 2 years now. The more we looked at it, the more we tried to avoid it. This is not an easy or a quick project. It's kind of like a marriage. There's some mental preparation you got to do. Well, we all got our tetanus shots and we finally manned up enough to actually tackle this project. And Mike's not doing anything today and we could really use the extra manpower. And besides, I hear he's got a knack for ripping stuff apart.
Yeah, this is a pretty rare car too, so we're going to show you how to take your time pulling it apart and salvage every piece you can.
Now that's important, because these two-door sedans, well, they were only made in '61, so there's not many of them left out there. Chevy was pushing the convertibles and the Super Sport model with a choice of 305, 340, and 350 horse engines, and the optional Power Glide. The Sport Coupe, or Bubble Top as it was called, was also popular in '61. The smooth, comfortable ride from the 4 coil springs helped make them disappear from the showroom floors. But we're not going to let this one disappear. Bottom line, it may not have been a popular platform, but just like our plain Jane Le Mans, in our book, it's still worth saving. It's just screaming for a new personality. And that's exactly what she's going to get. The body, trim, and interior will stay true to the original car, but the rest, it's in for a lot of change. A new stance from extensive framework, bags, mini tubs, and wheels, plus a stroked, modernized 409 and a 4-speed. It's going to live up to the new name, Red Sled. Now, I know it may not look like it, but there's still a lot worth saving on this car. So the first thing we want to do is give it a good once-over, just to see what we've got.
I think you're going to need a truck pan.
Yeah, I'd say you're right.
Hey, it's got some good doors on it.
Holy smoke. It's pretty bad when you can take pieces of the floor out by hand.
Oh, we need that.
What's that? Oh,
It's
cool.
our missing headlight bezel.
Here's the other side.
Sweet. All right.
Realistically, what? The car needs floor pans, lower rear quarters, trunk pan, some of the glass in the car, front left and right fender.
I don't think the car is that bad.
You don't?
No.
Polish it out.
That'll buff out.
Now we know we'll be replacing a lot of these parts, but it doesn't hurt to keep track of everything. When we're reassembling, it'll make it easier to figure out what hardware is needed.
With the old carpet out of the way, we got a good look at our floor pans, right down to the floor.
Well, here's a good shot of the frame.
When they're this bad, odds are we'll need to replace the bracing as well, but we'll get a better look once we get it up on the lift.
Seats are next, and more rust means more work.
The backside of the bolt is rusted off. There's no way that's going to come out. You're going to have to grind the head off
Cut
it or
off wheel.
something. Yeah.
Sometimes access is limited, so you have to get creative and use whatever you can to get the job done. This is a pretty important piece to save. Finding a replacement could cost lots of time and money.
Well, at least we got one good usable part out of this thing. So it ain't in the greatest of shape, but at least we can use it, rebuild it. I'd hate to have to track down another one of these suckers.
Trim looks good.
So yeah, we can polish the trim out, reuse it. Sweet, let's get the back seat out. There's 47 years of funk on this floor, so we're feeding it to the shop vac before we go any further. To make seat removal easier, the armrests are coming out first. I found a penny.
Monopoly money or something from the early days. Or I say early days, some of you watching might know exactly where that came from. 1943 quarter.
Whoa, it really is. Holy cow.
And I found a 1941 nickel. Figure 20, 21-year-old kids riding around, buying beer and stuff, dropping change in the back seat. That's pretty cool.
These panels may look like trash, but they can be used as templates for the upholsterer to make new ones. Window glass and regulators are also parts we need to keep track of, at least until we know whether we'll be able to find replacements.
Removing trim can be a time-consuming effort, not to mention a headache. It pays to be careful and not damage it, since most of this will be going to the plating shop to be reused. One easy way to keep track of small hardware and tick off your wife at the same time is to get all the Ziploc bags from your kitchen and label everything.
These taillights are garbage, but we have plans for replacing these, so no worries. Now the front bumper, that thing gave us nothing but problems. Hopefully the rear is going to be easier. We're stuck!
Next off are the deck lid and hood, and since there's very little rust on these, they will definitely be reused.
The damage to the front end could mean we have a bent frame. but once the front clip is off, we can get a better look at the damage.
Rick, look, that frame rail isn't that bent, if at all.
Actually, it doesn't look bad.
All right, Rick, the left front fender is obviously not usable. It needs a core support, battery box, pretty much a whole front clip. Do you think we can save anything?
Dude, I gotta be honest with you, man. I really thought we'd have more usable parts on this thing than this. This is pretty bad. So this is gonna require some research on the internet and tracking some stuff down.
All right.
There's no way around it, but anyway, let's let this thing sit for now. Let's get the doors pulled off.
Let's do it. We lucked out on the doors, no problems getting these off, and the cowl looks pretty good too, so it's going in the keeper pile.
We need to be careful with the back glass. Since this is a unique design, we may not be able to replace it. The best way to make sure it isn't damaged is to get the trim off first. Same with the windshield. Since the rubber is hard as a rock, we'll remove it and the glass should lift right out.
A few more pieces and we're almost ready to raise the body off of the frame. Brent went a couple of rounds with the rear bumper, but it didn't want to cooperate. When you get frustrated with a tough piece, sometimes it's best to let a fresh set of hands tackle it. Here are some of the parts we pulled off of the car that we might be able to reuse, like this front bumper that we're actually going to have a little fun with before we send it to the chrome replaters. The front headlight bezels are the same way, unless we can find new reproduction pieces. The cowl, all we got to do with that is blast it and repaint it.
Now, the steering column here is actually in really nice shape, but since we're going to go with a 4-speed, we can't use it, but we will find it another good home. Some other parts just flat out aren't salvageable, like this lower window frame here. Stuff like this can be really hard to come by, so we're going to take a little break. I'm going to go jump online and see what I can come up with. I didn't have any luck in my internet search for those quarter window frames, so we're going to go ahead and put this thing up on the rack and get the body pulled off.
Now we could use jack stands, but since we got the lift, we're going to take advantage of it.
With the amount of rust on the underside of this thing, we thought getting these bolts out was going to be tough, but they actually came out surprisingly easy. And because Impalas used X-frames, all the body mounts are on the firewall and behind the axle, nothing in the middle.
That body mount's not even connected.
The gas tank comes out next. A few spins of the cutoff wheel and we're in business. Just watch out for all that 40-year-old falling funk. Now with all the bolts out, we can lower it down, reposition the lift arms out to the body, and lift it right off. So here it is, the backbone of Red Sled. We're gonna measure the frame to make sure it's square, but the rest of it's going back to the recycler. The coils are gonna get replaced with airbags, but this 283, this thing's getting junked for that stroked and poked 409. But the body looks like something you'd use to strain your spaghetti. Now we got a lot of work ahead of us. Some of these panels, well, they're just not available, so some fabrication's gonna be in order. But before we can see what we really got, the body's gonna have to get blasted. So we're gonna put it on a rotisserie and get it out of the shop. All right, motor and tranny is gonna come out first to lighten the load, get this chassis a little easier to work with. A 40-plus-year-old tranny fluid, well, it's some pretty nasty stuff. And unfortunately, our 2-speed glide, well, it didn't come with a drain plug, so there's no good way to avoid a mess. Hey, welcome to the Muscle Car Shop. Our 67 Le Mans is out of here. We're back on task with our 61 Impala, Project Red Sled. This thing was in pretty bad shape. Okay, really bad shape when it rolled in here, but we dove right in to see what we were really gonna have to deal with. We saved almost everything we took off, except the 47 years worth of dirt. A lot of these parts, like the seats, these things will be hard, if not impossible, to find. Some of this stuff may not be reused, but it could be helpful when figuring out exactly what we need to order later. We lifted the body off the frame and sent it out to be blasted, then pulled the motor and tranny. We're ready to knock the front end apart on this sucker, but without all the weight to hold it down, the spring could come flying out. I'd like to keep all my body parts, so I got a plan. After removing the shocks, I'm placing a jack underneath. Then a chain is threaded through the springs and arms. This way, it's safe to go ahead and release the tension. Okay, here's something not a lot of people know about, but it's good information to have. There's usually a flat spot right on the side of these spindles. That's not just for decoration, that's to smack with a hammer to get this thing knocked loose. The frame's got an appointment with the sandblaster, so everything has to come off. Now you might want to stand back from your TV because parts are gonna be flying. Yes.
Ooh.
Once the frame is stripped down, we'll measure the front, center, and rear sections diagonally and cross our fingers that we won't be doing any frame pulling.
It's 107.5, about 107.5, so that's good. 67 inches, right on the money.
We're also checking to make sure it's level. Choose a point near the center, shim it to level, then check several other points along the frame. Much to our amazement, this rusted hunk of metal is square and level, so we can send it off to get sandblasted with no modifications. Now, from 1958 to 1964, Chevrolet used an X-frame which was designed to flex. Now, this may be great for ride quality, but if you're putting an angry 409 in your car like we're putting in a Red Sled, this could pose a pretty serious problem. And that means that we're going to be doing some pretty big reinforcements to our frame. Now, I don't know exactly how much torque that old chunk of iron is going to be putting out, and that's a little piece of information that I need to have. So I'm going to come down here and talk to the man with a plan. Hey, what's up, buddy?
How you doing, Rick?
Good, good, man. Hey, I guess you got the word on Red Sled. What you got cooking for us here?
Well, we found you a nice 409 core engine, but it's on a slow boat from somewhere, but it'll be here shortly. What did come in is this nice stroker kit from Eagle Specialty Products. And what's cool about it is it takes it from a 409 cubic inch to a 481 cubic inch.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know a whole lot about the 348s and the 409s, but I do know that they use a design that's unlike anything else.
Right, what's unique about this block is the combustion chamber is actually built into the block rather than the head.
Oh, I'll be darned. Well, you know, we also have all those Edelbrock parts that's going to get bolted to the top end of this thing. So what do you think we're going to be looking at for horsepower numbers here?
Well, hopefully we'll be above 500 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. But we'll know that once we get it on the dyno.
Yeah, nice. Well, let me know when it shows up, man.
Okay, we'll do it.
Cool, thanks.
See you later.
Well, here it is. We got our frame back from the sandblaster, and she's back down to her birthday suit. Now, we could actually seal this up and paint it the way it is, but that ain't how we roll here on Muscle Car. We're going to smooth this thing out because Red Sled isn't just going to be another pretty face. She's going to be detailed from the bottom to the top. That means we got a lot more work to do on this big old chunk of steel. Now, these factory welds here, well, they're not going to cut it. They're staggered, and we want a continuous bead for strength. Now, once we've added a couple spools of wire, we're going to grind the weld smooth. Now, Buddy gave us a pretty good idea how much power this chassis is going to have to handle, and this stock X frame is not going to cut it. Now, even Chevy realized that there were some weak points in this design because they added reinforcements in the convertible models right over the top of the rear frame rails. Now, we're going to follow their lead, but we're going to take it a step further. We're going to use the 1/8-inch plate to reinforce some key areas. Now, the first thing we got to do is extend this factory bracing further up this frame rail. That's going to give us a lot more strength and rigidity up here in the front portion of this X. Now, down the sides, we're going to add another big brace that's going to run down both sides. That's going to stiffen up the whole center section. Now, this part right here, obviously, we're going to have to cut a hole so we can access the bolts for a carrier bearing. The plate's going to run all the way to the back here where this rear mount is for the rear suspension. Now, this is going to take a heck of a beating from that Stroker 409, so we're going to box this in and reinforce it. Now, keep in mind also this frame is actually sitting on here upside down, so you're looking at the bottom side of it. Now, this is where we're going to add the bracing like the convertible has. This cross member here, it's not so much beat up as it is just ugly, so we're going to chop it out and put a nice piece of round stock in just for aesthetics. This rear piece here, this thing took a pretty good hit somewhere along the line and it's bent up. We could repair it, but it's going to be easier and faster. Chop it out and just build a new one for it. But where we got to start is go and build some templates. We're tracing all the pieces we're going to need on a cardboard and cutting them out all at once. After they're traced onto the sheet metal, it's time for the plasma cutter. The edges need to be ground smooth, making sure the outlines fit. We'll clamp them down, beat them and heat them until the contours are just right. The brace behind the rear end is getting cut out and replaced with a piece of round stock. It'll be stronger than the old one and look better too. One more area that needs attention is this rear brace. There. I'm using a shear and brake to form a new one out of 14-gauge sheet metal and then weld it in. Brent. Hey, check it out, man. Made that for the bottom side of it. I figure we're gonna be spending so much time underneath this thing, give us something cool to look at. Besides, you can use your mad TIG welding skills to attach it.
No problem, man, but I'll do a little grinding.
Oh, man. All right, I'll trade you. Hey, well, stick around. We still got a lot more work to do on this frame. Besides, the body's coming back from the blaster. We'll get to see what's left.
Up next, Rick heats things up, and the Impala gets some cool air.
Hey, Brent. What's up, man? Hey, this is looking killer.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, good job. Hey, we're gonna get this finished up, then we can get our side plates on, flip it over, and get the rest of our bracing done. These flames are hot, and if our plan works out, they'll look like they've been embossed in the metal after it's powder coated. The side pieces are next to go on. The clamps help bring them into the contour of the frame so we can get them tacked into place. We've welded on almost every inch of this thing so far, but we're not done yet, and we still have the other side to finish. While Brent gets those side panels finished up, I'm going to be working on the center brace. It's going to extend from the top and down the sides here and finish boxing in the center section. I'm going to try to do this out of one piece for no other reason but to keep it as strong as I possibly can. Now this is a pretty complex piece, and it's going to require a detailed template to get the curves just right, but it's nothing some cardboard and a marker can't handle. Now just like the plates for the other side, I'm cutting it out with a plasma cutter, grinding the edges off, and tacking it into place. Now here's where it gets interesting. This piece, well, it's got to be bent to shape, and the best way to do that, a lot of heat and a BFH. And of course, more welding. A few passes with the grinder and it's good to go. It's looking pretty good, and believe me, it's a lot heavier than when we started. Now we're going to be putting some pretty good sized wheels and tires on this thing, and that means we're going to have to modify the body for clearance. There's a really good chance we're going to end up having to modify this frame also. So we're going to hold off finishing out the rear bracing until we get all the suspension mocked up. We gave our good friends over to Air Ride Technologies a call. They sent us an entire system. Now there's a lot of boxes to go through here, so we're going to get everything unpacked, get it laid out, and see what we got. This kit comes with everything we're going to need, but we're mocking it up just to make sure we don't need to drill any holes or make any modifications before we get it powder coated. These A-arms are specifically designed for use with the shockwave airbags, so they bolt right in. Now here's something I would have screwed up on if I hadn't read the instructions. This actually isn't sealant, this is an anti-galling compound, and that means you do still need to use your Teflon tape. A fitting goes on each of the bags, and they'll connect to the air lines from the compressor. Now in some applications you may need to clearance the spring pockets, but in this case, well, we lucked out and they dropped right in. And next comes the steering stops, and then the spindles. Now so far, the only modification we've had to make was adding a couple holes for the front sway bar. After the steering box is in, we can put on the idler arm and center link. Drop in the tie rod ends, connect them to the spindles, and the front is done. Now it's easier to attach all the bars to the rear end housing before it's mounted to the frame, so we'll go ahead and get this out of the way. Our chassis is looking great. We're getting pretty close to putting some air to it, so hang tight because we got more bars and bags coming up later in the show. Hey guys, welcome back. We got our rear end housing bolted in. We're about ready to install the rest of our air ride setup. Now we're doing a complete mock-up on this chassis, and that means that we need to get our axles in. Now this rear end housing from Curry is based on the Ford 9-inch. And that means that we don't have to install our center section in order to get our axles in. These retainer plates hold the axles and bearings in, and also act as mounts for the rear brakes. The pan hard bar keeps the rear end centered on those hard turns. And And the shocks, oh, they keep the rebound under control. We ran into a little clearance issue here with this rear end. This aftermarket housing is using a bigger brace, which is great for strength, but now we've got an issue with clearance on our shock, so that means a little trimming is going to be in order. We'll touch up the bare metal with some paint later on to keep it from rusting. After pre-assembling the rear bags to the cups, they slide right into the spring pocket. These brakes from stainless steel look great, and right now that's about all they're doing is looking good. They're just mocked up for now. We're not going to bleed them out or anything. So let's get the wheels on it and get the sucker down on the ground. Faux sent us these 20-inch wheels for the front and a pair of 22s for the back. They look great in chrome, but we want a more sinister look, so we're going to black out the centers later on in our build. Now the compressor system won't be installed until the car is almost done, but we can still run the lines and use the shop compressor and a bottle valve to test everything out. Now is the fun part. Time to drop her down and see what happens. Since our wheel and tire package is slightly larger than our stock 14s, we're going to be watching for any binding or interference. Everything looks good. No binding in the suspension and plenty of clearance all the way around. Now the last thing we need to check before we finish our bracing is drive shaft clearance, and we're looking good there too. Now we can attach the last of our plates here now that our chassis has had a little altitude adjustment. We've made sure that our drive shaft is going to clear all of our bracing in here, but before we install them, there's a little something we've been dying to try out. Dimple dies. Using the press, the dies bevel the edges of the holes we cut. This type of thing is usually used to keep weight down, but we're not really concerned about that. Yeah, we just think it looks cool. But we're going to knock this chassis apart, finish welding in the rest of the bracing, and send this bugger off for powder coating. And that means that the body's up next. Man, we got a lot of work to do on that thing, so keep tuning in. Hey guys, welcome to Muscle Car. Red Sled's got a lot of body work ahead, and we're going to get rolling on that today. But before we can start that, we need to get our chassis put back together. We've already modified the X-frame on the 61 Impala by boxing the center and adding bracing to the rear. We mocked up the air ride to make sure everything fit, tore it back down, then sent it out for powder coating. If you've never seen powder coating done, it's actually a pretty interesting process. I brought our frame here down to Powder X to get it done, and our camera crew came along so you guys can check it out. Well, here we are, Powder Express. Picked a heck of a day for this trip, huh? You must be the infamous Joey Golliver. How you doing?
Nice to meet you, Rick. How you doing?
Yeah, good to meet you. Well, we got a frame for you.
Good deal.
Got it all reinforced and boxed and ground down, and now we got it all covered with rust. Hope you can take care of that for us too.
I'm sure we can. What color are we going to do this thing today?
Gloss black.
Sounds fantastic.
Shiny.
Pretty good deal. We'll get you guys in out of the rain and get this thing coated for you.
Awesome. Sounds good. Now look at this. This is after 45 minutes out in the rain. You can see how fast the rust starts to attack this thing. It's a good thing we're here because we got a whole crew that's going to take care of it and clean it up for us. The first thing these guys do is break out a DA sander to knock the surface rust off. The step's not necessary if the part is already clean and rust-free. Next, a steam bath. The heat pulls the oils out of the metal and from behind our welds. The steam also contains phosphate, which creates a chemical reaction that allows the powder to bond with the metal. It also protects the part, minimizing any rust if the coating ever gets scratched. It goes into the oven, but just for a few minutes to draw any remaining oils to the surface. Another bath, this time without phosphate. It'll clean off the last of the contaminants. And back into the oven to dry, but just for about 5 minutes. Then it goes into the powder booth. Dust off your 7th grade science knowledge, because it might come in handy here. The part being coated is grounded first. Why? Well, it's a matter of physics. The gun creates negative ions that the powder collides with, giving it a negative charge. Since negative particles are attracted to the strongest ground, they're pulled straight onto the part. Now once it's evenly coated, it goes into the 400-degree oven. It has to bake for about 40 minutes, so I caught up with Joey to get the lowdown on PowerX.
PowerX is one of the leading powder coating equipment manufacturers in the country. We design and build all of our own powder coating equipment, and we sell it to individuals around the country that are looking to get into their own powder coating business. The great thing about powder that most people don't understand is that you can do basically any color with powder that you can do with liquid. There's powdered chromes, there are candies, translucents, textures. It's an endless supply of colors. You can do whatever color that you choose.
I could just see the Impala with that candy pink frame. Okay, maybe not. Oh, man.
Looks great, doesn't it?
Holy smoke.
You wanted gloss black.
Whew, you guys are making us look good. Now, how was I gonna hold up?
That's gonna hold up fantastic. We know how much damage you guys do to
You're gonna
stuff.
say, you do know you're doing this from muscle car. We beat the hell out of these things. Awesome, awesome, good job. I'll get the truck, we'll get this thing loaded up. Time to get this baby back to the shop and get the chassis reassembled. Now this time the chassis is going back together for real, and we don't want this thing coming apart when we're driving down the road. So I'm going to use a few drops of Loctite on the threads to make sure that everything stays put. Now I got to tell you, this is one time when just a few bucks can really save your butt. Now Impala came from the factory with drum brakes on all four corners, and we all know that drum brakes are weak, so stainless steel hooked us up with a major upgrade. We got 11-inch rotors on the back and 13s up front, but another cool part, the calipers are going to match our paint scheme. We decided not to use power steering, but we are going to upgrade with a close ratio steering box and linkage from Borgeson. Before we can tackle the body, we're going to roll the completed chassis in to check clearance. We knew that the first point of contact would be the new bracing in front of the rear end, so we'll have a little cutting to do under the back seats. And these box braces are in the way, so we're trimming them back too. The rear seat pans will eventually be replaced, but Brent's cutting the old ones in the right places now. That way we'll have a reference where to cut the new ones when the time comes. With the modifications done, we can check clearance one more time. This back brace clears perfectly, so we're looking good so far. All right, now's a moment of truth. We already know we had the body trim to clear those 22s at ride height, but now we need to drop it all the way down to make sure we still have clearance. I'll tell you what, that was a lot easier fit than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to put a little mini tub in it.
Well, maybe an inch or so?
Yeah, about an inch.
Like do that and re-radius the wheel wells here a little bit. I think we got it.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Cool.
Cool. Well, our parts showed up just in time because we're ready to start cutting the Swiss cheese out of this thing. So we're going to get the rest of the parts unpacked and attack this thing with a plasma, so stick around.
Coming up, the bottom drops out of the 61 Impala and Rick's rusty rocker repair.
Hey, welcome back. The first thing to go is going to be this floor pan here because it's just wasted. Now this front cross member, this is going too because it's rusted through anyway, so it's not doing any good. The rear brace, I'm going to keep that in place just to hold the body together while I work on it. The quickest way to get the majority of the junk metal cleared out is with one of my favorite tools, the plasma cutter. I even use it to cut out a little souvenir to hang on the wall. Once the big chunks are out of the way, I can cut the braces out. Last goes the rear seat pan, leaving that rear brace. A spot weld drill bit will get the last of the old floor pan loose. On pinch welds like this, you can use a spot weld cutter. A little hammer and dolly work will flatten out the edges. As you can see here, this rocker's seen better days, so while Brent gets rolling on the mini tubs in the back, I'm going to stick some new sheet metal up here in the front. Once the outer sheet metal is removed, you can get a better look at the damage. And no patch panels are made for this part, so I'm fabbing some up. While I do that, Brent's making short work of that trunk, saving whatever he can. The trunk latch is all right, so it's a keeper. Unfortunately, well, not much else is worth saving. Well, looks like we better order some more sheet metal. You know, a rusty car is a lot like a box of chocolates. You really don't know what you got till you get into it. Well, I got into this one and it's a lot worse than I thought, and that means my patch panels are going to be a lot bigger. The trick here is to take your time and make sure your patch panels are accurate to the originals. Since I'm dealing with a fender mount also, any variance from the stock location, well, that's going to mean that our fender won't line up. Done. Finally, we can test fit our floor pans. Clamps and clecos will hold them in place while we mark for the braces. Then they come back out to punch holes for the plug welds. Now only the ends are available for the front brace, so they're welded in place first, then the original is measured, marked, and chopped up to fill the gap. Now once the front brace is replaced, we can chop out the rear. With the new one in, we can move on. The floor pans go in for the last time, and more clecos and clamps will hold everything in place while it becomes a permanent part of our Impala. Finally, the clecos come out, and the last brace goes in. Hey man, the floor's looking awesome.
Appreciate it.
Sweet. Well, I know you're anxious to get on the rear tubs on this thing, so if you want, I'll tackle this side and you can get on the back.
Sounds good to me.
Well, hey, Red Sled's made a lot of progress today, but man, we still got a long ways to go, so stick around. The front floor pans are in, welded solid and looking killer, and that means we get to turn our attention back to these rear tubs. Now Brent's already got the trunk cut out and all the bracings out of the way. So what's the plan on the rear end here?
I'm figuring just taking an inch out of both sides. Got it marked, dude, so what do you say we start cutting?
Right on. I'm on it. Just remember, measure twice, cut once. If you plan ahead and keep all your cuts straight, it should almost fall back together. An air saw with a wide blade is used for the first cuts. Then the plasma is brought in for slicing the wheel wells. And once the section is cut loose, a grinder will clean up the edges. Okay, after about 4 hours worth of measuring and 10 minutes worth of cutting, we managed to gain an extra inch. So now what we need to do is get this thing tacked in place and start filling in the gaps. With the tub tacked back in place, we can build the filler strip. More clecos are pressed into service to help hold things solid while it's all stitched together. Well, we got one tub in, we got one more to go here. Now, Red Sled's got a lot of hours left in the shop, but unfortunately for this week, we're out of time. But check us out next week because we're going to be rolling in a whole new project. But for now, we're out of here. Old Red Sled has come a long way. After tearing it apart, we braced up the frame, mocked up the air ride suspension, had it powder coated, fit the body, put in new floor pans, and got started on the tub. Now that the tubs are in, the bracing behind the back seats can go back in place. since the tub's added an extra inch on each side, the braces in the corners will have to be replaced, so Brent's gonna make some new ones. Now we could use our shrinker stretcher to make this piece, but you don't need a shop full of tools to do this. Some relief cuts and careful bending will also work. Now one last detail before the seat pans go in. They need an edge to attach to. No problem. A couple simple pieces welded in place and the pans can go in.
Cool, Brett. Looks like you're almost ready for the pans, huh?
Not quite. We're gonna have to chop them up a bit.
A little bit.
Where we added that inch,
Uh-huh.
we're gonna have to take it out this right here.
Ah, gotcha. Much cutting to be done.
Yes.
Cool. We will hack it. If we want these to fit right, I need to keep this molded edge, so I'm trimming it off, removing the part we don't need, then Brent's reattaching it in its new position. Now once all the mounting holes are drilled and it's punched out for spot welds, it's ready to become a permanent part of Red Sled.
Hey, man. How's it going?
Yeah, it's looking pretty good.
Ooh, wish this side was looking that good. I still got some trimming up here, still gotta fit that. Still got a little bit of work to do.
All right. See you in a bit.
See ya. All right, now part of the problem with this panel is that we got too much material over here and it's not letting this thing drop in, which is leaving a gap over here on this edge. So the first thing I gotta do is come through and get that out of my way. One more test fit.
Haha, way more better.
Looks good, so I can prep it and drop it in.
This has got to come up, so I need a jack and hold it.
Now sometimes the best tips are low tech. And here's some garage engineering at its finest. Hey, you guys know what I mean. You use what you got. Okay, finally got our rear seat pan here trimmed out and fitting pretty good so I can get it welded in. After that, we can put in our tunnel that we designed to clear our frame bracing. Then we can move on to patching in our quarters.
After the break, Rick and Brent wage a battle against Red Sled's rust.
Now Brent's got that rear seat tunnel welded in place and looking great. As long as he's on a roll with the sheet metal, he's going to keep going on these quarter panels. Meanwhile, there's a lot of other panels that need my attention, so I'm going to get started on the fenders. This one has rust exactly where you'd expect it. Down in the lower corner behind the wheel well, so that's the only area that I'll need to cut out. Now if you notice here, when I sliced my fender, it knocked our bottom line here out of alignment. That's because it's sitting on a rack. To correct that, I'm going to use a piece of copper wire and actually pull the bottom of this fender in and bring that back into alignment. Once you start cutting on these panels, you're probably going to uncover more problems. Hey, but that's what rust repair is all about.
Ooh, that's freaking lovely.
Yeah, but Brent's got his own rust issues to deal with on the quarter panel. After marking the area that needs to be patched, he takes a cutoff wheel to it.
Look, here's part of the window. It's like going to the beach inside this car.
Whenever you can see rust on the outside, there's always going to be much more behind it. If you want a good solid patch, you've got to replace the inner pieces as well. Brent's cutting a larger piece than he's actually going to need from the patch panel. That way it'll be easier to handle. The front of the wheel wells are being re-radiused to make room for those bad A22s, so a little modification is going to be in order. With that done, you can cut the patch down to size and weld it in.
Is it freaking awesome or what? Watch how this thing will slide right up in there like so. He's ready to start doing some welding, son. Word. Glorious.
Now sometimes when the clecos don't pull it in tight enough, you can attach a stud to pull the sheet metal out to where you need it. Now this marks a milestone in the progression of Red Sled, the first glob of plastic filler. Now all the work that Brent's doing over there is going to require the same thing, and believe me, there's a lot more metal work that still needs to be done. And that means that this is just the beginning of a long, muddy journey. The first application of filler is the most important. Think of it as a foundation. If it's not right, nothing you put on top of it will be right either. A DA sander can be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on your skill. If you're a rookie, a block and guide coat's a better bet. Now here's one of those things that's so obvious that a lot of guys don't really think about it. When you're mixing your Bondo, be sure you spread it out and work all those air bubbles out of there, otherwise they'll come back and bite you in the butt. If you've worked your sheet metal correctly, it shouldn't take more than a couple coats. Now once I knock it down with a DA, I'll smooth it out with a coat of finishing putty and a block. We got one panel down and plenty more to go. Now, no one ever said that this was a fast or an easy process, but we want Red Sled to look perfect, and there is no shortcut to perfection. But all this hard work is going to pay off the day she comes rolling out of that booth looking straighter than the day she was built. Hey, welcome back. I've been doing the bodywork on these panels and I got the fenders and the doors done. Next up is this hood here, and I got a little tip for you. Since we sandblasted it, they took all the seam sealer out of the back. And that means that there's no support for the face of this thing. To solve that problem, we need to replace the seam sealer on the back before we can attack the bodywork on the front. Now this is seam sealer, but I've even used windshield urethane. The tape's here to give it a clean edge. I'm not sealing this completely because moisture could get trapped inside and cause rust, so I'm leaving some gaps to allow water to escape. Meanwhile, Brent's making progress on the quarter panels, cutting out the old and patching in the new. Full quarters just aren't available for 61 Impalas, but patch panels are. Year One set us up with the front pieces and Sherman Associates with these rear panels. But the rust we're dealing with extended further into the wheel wells than the patch panels were designed for, so Brent's adding a strip to fill it in. Welcome to Muscle Car. We're knocking out some trouble spots on a 61 Impala today. Now we've already taken care of a lot of rust spots, but believe me, there's plenty more where that came from. We also need to get all the lead filler out. The last time we got the rear seat pans in, got the quarter panels patched in, and started the bodywork on the fenders. Now next up is this piece of Swiss cheese here that used to be a weather strip channel. I've heard of guys actually passing up on project cars because of problems just like this. It can be a real pain in the you-know-what to fix, because what we've actually got here is 3 separate pieces. This outer piece here, we're going to patch this in and save it. This inner piece is part of the trunk floor, so it's going to get chopped out and replaced with the rest of it. This little channel right here, we're going to custom make that and replace that one piece at a time. After measuring the length and total width of the part, I'll shear it to width and make the bends. The shrink or stretcher will help tweak it to the right shape. We need to keep the trunk bump stops, so I'll remove those first. When sheet metal gets this flimsy, it can bend out of shape when you pull it off, so I made the new piece before removing the old one. That way, I'd still be able to compare the two. Now's a good time to repair some of the rust that'll be hard to get at once the channel is put back on. The new channel goes in next. Then I'll drill out the spot welds and get the rest of the old trunk floor out of the way. While I'm packing more junk in the trunk, Brent has his eye on some rust. Now some of these holes are going to have to be patched, but these small ones, well, they can be filled with silicon bronze. But before anything can happen, he's grinding it down to bare metal. Silicon bronze has a low melting point, so the steel doesn't melt before the bronze fills the hole. Brent's using a TIG because it's a lot easier to control the heat. Now we've replaced a lot of sheet metal around this trunk, so there's a chance that things aren't going to line up the way that they should. So before we get that rear brace in and get the trunk floor in, we're going to hang the trunk lid and make sure it still lines up.
How's your gap?
It's getting a little tight down on the end.
So it's perfect over here. We'll work on this side over here.
I think if we come back, push that out, and then knock this out a little bit before we weld that brace and stuff in, will be cool.
This is where a good old-fashioned hammer and dolly come into play. Now don't make the mistake of using too much force. The sheet metal was stamped into shape and has a memory. You're just reminding it where it's supposed to be. Now sometimes I'll use a rubber mallet because it doesn't stretch the metal like a steel hammer does. There we go. See how that's coming out now? It's looking beautiful. I can see it's still inged a little bit. So I'm going to take one more whack because I can sight this one right down that other one. Since I'm looking at this, and that's almost the same radius as that, I'm going to use this tip on the inside and whack the snot out of it, get my body line back in. Now right here we got a high spot where this got hit and it pushed that metal up and created a high point. So you got to work that down, but you can't just hit it or else you'll move the whole area back down. So you need to get a dolly, put the dolly on the back side of it to support the low area and then hit the high spot. And as you move that down, that low spot will actually walk back up. Just like that. Beautiful. With the taillight opening back to its former glory, the rest of the trunk can go in. With the help of some clecos and plug welds, it all comes together easy as pie. Bring it up, senor. Up. Right there. Time to custom make some more parts that nobody repops. Cardboard and a marker can be your best friend here. Now from the factory, these extensions were part of the trunk floor, but the aftermarket parts don't include them, so it looks like we're on our own. But we're not done yet, and it's becoming obvious why some guys would pass up a car with this kind of problem. The two of us have spent about 15 hours using a lot of specialized tools to bring together over a dozen separate pieces just in the trunk alone. Now, just like any project, you just need a game plan and take it one piece at a time. Now we got a lot of pieces and a lot of man hours into patching the rear end of this thing together. We're going to get the rest of this trunk floor welded in. When we come back, we'll see if the deck lid still lines up. Got it?
Look at that.
After the break, suit up. It's time to get the lead out.
Well, now comes the moment of truth. Time to drop the deck lid now that we've got everything welded together and see how far off our body lines are.
It's rough.
Oof, yeah it is. You know what that means?
I need a porta power, I think.
You got it. I'll go grab it. A porta power is basically a portable hydraulic ram. It comes with a pump, ram, extensions, and different feet. This one is a 4-ton model, but they come in other sizes too. You can use them for what we're doing here, spreading a gap, but they can also be used for straightening frame rails, pushing roof pillars, or just about anything else you need a lot of pushing power for.
Ooh, hear it cracking.
Like I said earlier, metal has a memory, so you'll have to over push it and let it spring back to where you want it.
Yeah, better. Not overhanging anymore, at least. Still got a ways to go.
It's better to make several pushes, increasing the pressure slightly each time, than to make one big push too far.
I think it moved. Where's a hammer? Let's hit it and relieve some of the stress across here. I'll move it by another 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch.
Hitting it with a hammer while it's under stress will give the metal new memory, helping it to stay in place.
It's one tough car, man.
Yeah, it needs to go more.
Let's see it. We're actually pulling in the, see where it's sucking it in? We're actually pulling on the factory spot welds now.
There we go. Perfect. Hey, it's time to get the lead out, literally. Now, lead filler can cause a lot of problems in your paint down the road, like blistering and bleeding. So we're gonna melt it out. But you gotta keep in mind, lead can be really dangerous stuff, so you gotta protect yourself. That means covering yourself up, wearing a respirator, and using good ventilation. A portable local exhaust system with a HEPA filter will keep the fumes from contaminating the area. Wear a suit and gloves, and don't forget to cover your feet. If a child or susceptible person comes in contact with residue left in your clothing, shoes, or body, they can get lead poisoning, which can cause brain damage. So shower and wash your clothes afterwards, and don't lick yourself clean. Well, the method is pretty simple. Use a torch to heat the lead to its melting point, then scrape it off. The more heat you apply, the more fumes are released, so use as little heat as you can to get the job done. If you have access to a flameless heat source, use it. You also need to dispose of the lead properly. Place it in a 6mm bag and take it to your local hazardous waste disposal site. And don't forget to clean the floor. With all the sheet metal work done on Red Sled, we can get rolling on the mud work. But before we do that, we need to get the body back on the chassis, make sure that the tire's still clear, and make sure the body mounts still line up. You know, we've been pretty lucky so far with this project. But as the body drops down, our luck runs out. Now, as any guy knows who builds cars, if you change one thing, it can have a domino effect. Case in point is the body mounts. Since we tubbed each side by an inch, our body mounts are now off by an inch. Now, there's a few ways that you could fix this, but sometimes the best way is the easiest way. So we're just gonna drill some holes and run some bolts through them. Now, don't go anywhere, because once I get this fixed, we're gonna start hanging some body panels. Hey, welcome back. We got our body mounts taken care of and we're ready to start hanging some body panels. Now, considering all the cut and chopping we've done on Red Sled, the problems that we've run into have been pretty minor. But to avoid any problems in the future, we're gonna hang all of our sheet metal, set our gaps, and then we'll finish our body work.
Let's go up with it a little, because the body line right here is down. That one is too.
Kick it up and slide it back a little bit.
The core support needs to go on before we can hang the fenders. This used one showed up just in time. We'll get it blasted and primered later, but it'll do just like it is for mock-up.
I gotta put a shim in.
Now back in the day, even the factory used shims, and we're no different. If you in the right spot, and the driver's side's looking nice.
Oh, this side ain't looking so good.
Hey Brent, give me a hand for a second.
That mount in there is a mile away from the hole,
Exactly.
too.
The mount's like an inch off. So what do you think? Pull the fender off and try to bend that corner down?
I can bend that back. Let me see what that bracket looks like on the other side.
Whoever took this fender off the donor car bent it, is what happened.
Hey, it's rolled up bad.
Is it?
Yeah, this side's like kicked straight out.
Yeah, dude, you're right. This side here is all bent up. Oh. That whole thing's bent up probably a good 1/4 inch. Do you want to try bending that bracket down?
Let's snatch your fender off.
Yeah. Dude.
It's not moving.
Need a bar. Need something to put.
Deep thoughts.
All right, you hold that end down. See if I can get this end tweaked. There it goes.
Yeah, it's going your way now.
Oh, there it goes. Wanna try it back on there?
I gotta move that stand.
And sometimes the TV stuff can get in the way of the car stuff. And sometimes TV stuff, it gets in the way of snack time. But through sheer determination, we forge on.
Does it line up the hole?
Dude, we are the best panel liner uppers ever.
It's perfect. That's it right there.
Cool.
Our original hinges were tweaked and we're still trying to find another set. That's all right, we don't need the hood to open and close. We just need it in place to set our gaps. So we're gonna drop it in and keep rolling on our bodywork. Now keep tuning in because Red Sled's still got a lot of hours left in the shop. But for now, we're out of here. There's a lot of famous muscle cars out there, like the Bullitt Mustang or the Challenger from Vanishing Point. And while Detroit was building them, California was making them famous in movies and music. But one of the most recognizable songs out there isn't even about the car. It's about the engine. Chevrolet's infamous 409. Hey Brent, check out what I found out in front of horsepower.
Oh, cool, an engine for Red Sled.
Yeah, it doesn't get any cooler than a 409 and an Impala.
I heard that. Well, hey, what do you say we put it in, man? I'd like to make some inner fenders right here. Maybe bolt up the headers and steering, see what kind of room we got in there.
Cool, works for me, man. Put it together.
Let's do it.
In order to make this old hunk of steel worthy of its new heart, we braced up the old X-frame, put in air ride suspension, widened the tubs, patched up the old sheet metal, got started on the bodywork, and smoothed out the bumpers. Our heads were pretty full, so the guys down at Horsepower stepped up to build the engine. Joe headed down to Georgia for help from 409 expert Lamar Walden, who set us up with a vintage 409 block. Bored and stroked it to 476, then decked and honed it to perfection. Then they custom made some high compression aluminum pistons and balanced our Eagle crane. Back at the shop, Buddy, Mike, and Joe brought it all together with Edelbrock's W Series Performer RPM heads and intake, topped off with Edelbrock's classic 409 valve covers and a pair of their 600 CFM Performer carbs. It was ready for the dyno. With Hooker's competition headers bolted on, it pulled 497 horsepower and 525 foot-pounds of torque. Now that we've got our hands on it, we can bolt up the tranny and drop it into Red Sled. The bell housing we're using has a dust shield that needs to go on first, then the flywheel. Using an alignment tool, the clutch disc goes on next, then the Hayes pressure plate. Be sure to install the clutch fork first. Then, to lessen the odds of those clutch parts entering the passenger compartment, we're going to cover it up with a Lakewood scatter shield. In keeping with a nostalgia vibe, a Richmond Super T10 4-speed brings up the back. Prothane's urethane motor mounts will keep this 409 in place better than the stock ones, with less flex and less deterioration. Time to kick the cool factor up on Project Red Sled another notch and stab this baby in. Now, GM used the same mounts from 283 all the way up to 454. So that means we can actually use the original 283 mounts on our frame. Even with the core support out of the way, a little finesse is required to get the engine to meet up with the mounts. But it's nothing a jack and a little patience can't take care of.
Right there. We're actually looking pretty good. Take the whole jack and shove it to the passenger side.
Since clearance is tight, we're using Doug's stock style ceramic coated headers. We'll lose a few horsepower from the free-flowing style, but these are designed to work in the tight quarters that we have to deal with. These Stage 8 locking fasteners will hold them in place, and they'll never have to be retightened. Since some Impalas came with 4 speeds, the stock crossmember still works. Time to drop the core support back in. Then we can set the hinges in place so we know how much clearance we'll have for wheel wells. We considered using original style wheel wells, but we didn't for 2 reasons. A, the old ones were rusted out junk, and B, we couldn't find any replacements. Our only option left, to build our own. I've started by measuring the overall dimensions and transferring them to cardboard. From there, let the trimming begin. I start out by making rough cuts to get the general shape, then trim a little at a time to get a more precise template. Now before we go any further, I'm going to set these pre-built fenders in place. That way I know all my measurements are correct. I picked up these trailer fenders from a farm supply store for under 50 bucks a pair. They come in a ton of different sizes and they'll save you a lot of time. With the suspension fully compressed, I'm using a roll of 3/4 inch masking tape to set the clearance to the tire. Hey Brent, want to do some cutting?
Sure.
Sweet, I got the measurements right there on the top for you.
Cool.
Our tires are wider than the fenders, and there is no way we're putting skinnier tires on, so something's got to give. And the first thing to go is the inner lip. Next, Brent's reshaping the radius to match the tires more closely. They would have worked fine as they were, but we like a tighter fit. Well, just because it looks better. Cool, got it trimmed up?
Oh yeah, get it ready to go.
Looks good. I do see a problem though.
What's that?
This is hanging down here so far, I'll bet you can see it through the wheel well. Oh, yeah you can. Like quite a bit. We're gonna have to lose probably 4 or 5 inches off the tail end of that right there.
Hey, what do you say we take the other side, flip it around, and have it swoop back in?
Swap them side to side and kind of get a nest curve at. Ooh, that'd be cool. And then just blend it into the firewall in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work.
Let's cut it up, dude.
Cool. On the bright side, you don't have to worry about cutting these things up. They're cheap, and if you screw one up beyond repair, they made a lot more, and it won't eat up your whole paycheck to replace it.
Drop this in there, Richard.
Hey, that's looking pretty good.
Yeah, I don't think it looks too bad. The whole idea we had about swapping these 2 cutoff pieces, though, isn't going to work.
Bummer.
But I think the piece we cut off of it, though, will, though.
No, that's cool. As long as we got it tied into the firewall somewhere so it's not slinging stuff up, that'll work. Yeah, that's fine.
Get these sides made up, man.
Yep, I'm on it. Well, hey, don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, we're going to figure out how all this stuff is going to go together. Hey, welcome back. Our inner fenders are coming along nice, and once I get these side panels cut out, we can set them in place and trim them to fit those trailer fenders that Brent modified. After making an initial cut with the shear and a pass of the plasma cutter, I'm trimming it up on the bandsaw. We've got to get the suspension up to get the rough cut piece in place. drop it back down until it just kisses the top of the tire. The wheel well gets set in place so we can mark off the metal that's going to go in the scrapper. Once the side piece is free again, I'm trimming it on the bandsaw one more time. Hey Brent, got your present.
All right.
I hear you are the master bead roller.
You probably heard incorrect, but I'll give it a shot.
This part's not going to be under a lot of stress, but it will be under a lot of scrutiny. And the beads, well, they just look cool. Brent's marking out a rough idea of where they need to be, and the bead roller does the rest. With the bead rolling done, the whole thing can be stuck together with a TIG. Dressing it up with the grinder will get it ready for some plastic filler. Brent's been working on the top side of Red Sled. Lower valances aren't available for this car, and the original ones, well, they were only useful as templates, so it's time for some fabrication. These are pretty complicated panels with multiple compound curves, so building them in one piece is impossible. Brent's starting by duplicating the shape of the biggest piece using the slip roller. Using the original as a guide, cutouts are marked to mimic the factory stampings. The corner piece is the most complex. After making a two-dimensional version of a three-dimensional piece, it's time to coax it into shape. He gets it close with the help of a hammer and a shop bag, but to smooth out the bumps requires the finer touch of the English wheel. It looks pretty close, so we can tack it into place, continuing to shape it as he goes. Once it's completely welded, a grinder and a 40 grit disc will finish blending it together. Now the fit looks good, but now we need a way to attach it to the body. Brent's plan is to make some simple mounting tabs. These will give us something to screw into that can remain hidden behind the bumper. Since the '61 Impala limped into muscle car, we brazed up the X-frame, we gave it some air ride, widened the tubs, patched up the sheet metal, smoothed out the bumpers, mocked up the 409 and 4-speed, and finally pulled the body back off the chassis. Before we really get going on the bodywork, there's a few odds and ends we need to finish up, like boxing in these body mounts. The sealer's done its job in protecting the metal, but it's time for most of it to come off. A 36 grit disc on a DA removes the majority of it and preps the surface for bodywork. A stripper disc takes care of the tight areas, and some hand sanding will knock off the rest of the shine. Before we go any further, the whole car needs to be blown off and wiped down with pre-cleaner because we want the surface as clean as possible before any bodywork is done. After a rub down, she's ready for some filler. When spreading the plastic, especially the first layer, it's important to work it into the surface and make sure you don't trap any air bubbles. After waiting for it to harden, we'll rough it in with 80 grit. The first layer is for filling in low spots. It doesn't have to be perfect yet, so you don't want to oversand here. You know, ever since our bodywork extravaganza episode aired a few months back, we've gotten some emails asking me whether or not the cardboard I used to mix a filler on is going to pull any of the resins out of the plastic. Well, in my experience, it's very, very little, if any at all. Definitely not enough to ever make a difference. Now, you can use a commercially available mixing board or an old piece of scrap metal like Brent's using, but if you work in a shop, most of the time when you go to grab it, someone's left a big old wad of plastic on it. So I've learned to just use a piece of cardboard. It's always worked for me. Bodywork equals lots of dust, so it's a good idea to get some ventilation going. If there's one trait that top body men possess, it's patience. When dealing with large areas like a quarter panel, you may have to go over it 4 or 5 times before the first coat of primer ever goes on. Body men are like artists, and they all have their own style. Some guys prefer to hand sand everything, others use air tools. Most guys use a combination of the two. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do it, as long as you end up with a straight panel. Guide coat isn't just for primer. It can also be used on filler to give you a better indication of where you are. You know the old saying, seeing is believing? Well, at this stage, don't trust your eyes. Use your hands and guide coat to gauge your progress. With the quarter panels roughed in, it's time to start smoothing out some of the smaller areas, like the trunk lip and taillight panels. I'm using a stripper wheel to clean off the surface rust that Red Sled's accumulated sitting around the shop. Once it's cleaned off, I'm back to spreading plastic. I'll rough it into shape using the spreader and even my fingers. While I'm taking care of the back end, Brent's up front smoothing out the firewall.
Still got some sanding to do on the firewall before it's as smooth as eggs. I'll finish this up and work on the roof when we take a break. When we come back, we'll get at the booth for some primer.
Up next, Red Sled's roughed in, so it's time to prime.
Hey guys, welcome back. You know, when we got the lead pulled out of this thing, we told you we were going to come back later and finish it with the trim on. So while Brent's working on the roof, I'm going to get the window trim fitted. Since these parts have already been polished, I'm using electrical tape to protect the finish and prevent the filler from sticking to the trim. Since this area is a seam, I'm using metal filler instead of plastic filler. It holds up better in high stress without cracking. You could also do this using a torch and lead-free solder, minus the electrical tape, of course. I'm using a pocket knife to score the edge. Once it dries, I can just break off the excess. I'll use some 36 grit by hand to blend in the top edge, then come back with some 80 grit on a DA to rough in the rest of the shape. Now at this point, you can pull the tape off and check the fit.
Like a glove.
With all the bodywork roughed in, it's time to turn Red Sled orange. As always, we start with masking up anything we don't want sprayed. Okay, all you paint guys out there, pay attention. Our filler primer of choice is Clausen's Z-Chrome Rust Defender. Every time we use it, a ton of emails flood in about the stuff. If you want more info, check out powerblocktv.com and look for the link to Auto Body Color and Supply. This layer of primer will seal in the metal and gives a fresh starting point for blocking and continuing the bodywork. You heard right, this is only the first prime. Red Sled's gonna see a lot more love before she ever sees the color red. Hey guys, welcome to Muscle Car. A tribute Trans Am, Altered Ego, Street Fighter, and Red Sled are all missing two critical systems, brake lines and fuel lines. Now installing these can be pretty exciting if you get it wrong.
Watching a car go up in flames or even into the wall can be pretty entertaining, unless it's your car. So to avoid that kind of thrill, you might want to take some notes today. All of our projects still need brake lines. The Impala is getting them today while the body's off the chassis, so it'll be easier for you to see what's going on.
Now there's a lot more to running brake lines than just laying pipe. Now, back in the day when juice brakes first came on the scene, it was all about steel, but nowadays you got a lot of options.
When Red Sled was new, it came from the factory with raw steel line, which is prone to rust and corrosion and can lead to brake failure. Today you can choose from galvanized steel or stainless steel. Galvanized is cheap, easy to work with, and easy to find. Stainless is a little more expensive, but a whole lot better to look at. Since Red Sled is a high-end build, we'll be using the stainless. First step is to mount the flex lines. Always make sure that you leave enough slack in the line so it doesn't pull or stress during suspension travel. Since these are full floating calipers, we need to put flex lines on all four corners. The nice thing about 60s muscle car frames is they're thick enough to be drilled and tapped. Try that with a late model import. Matco's hydraulic flare tool is one of the best ones out there, and it comes with dies to fit the most common sizes of tubing. It's a lot easier to mark your lines without the body on the frame. If you're working in tight quarters, just measure carefully before you make each bend. They don't have to be exact. As long as they seal completely and don't interfere with any moving parts, they'll be safe. This line bender from Godman High Performance is easy to use and gives show quality results. It's size specific, so it's more precise than universal benders and gives tight bends without kinking. Got a few more bends to make, so I'll work on those while we take a break.
Hey guys, we're back. You know, another great skill to have under your belt is knowing how to paint chrome, and it can really come in handy if you want that monochromatic style for your car by painting the trim and the bumpers, or if you just want to take your chrome wheels and give them a little different style. And that's what we're going to do here today. We got the wheels pulled off a Red Sled, and we're going to paint the centers jet black for a more sinister look. To get all the grime off, I'm spraying them down with brake cleaner since it won't leave a residue. See all that stuff coming off? Wipe off any excess and make sure to blow out all your nooks and crannies. Follow up with an ammonia-based glass cleaner. The next step will involve abrasive, so make sure to protect the areas you don't want scuffed up. Chrome is surprisingly easy to scratch, so don't think you can get away without masking it off. A red Scotch-Brite is just aggressive enough for the job. You can use sandpaper, just stick to a fine grit like 120 and up, or you could end up sanding through the chrome. I'm using a reducer to draw out any contaminants that may have been pushed into the scratches during sanding. Now you'd think that after scrubbing this thing down to the Scotch-Brite it'd be spotless. As you can see, it's not. You need to get the chrome as clean as possible for the paint to stick. The green fine line tape I'm laying down first will give a cleaner edge than regular masking tape. It's more expensive, but worth it to get a quality job. Since sloppy overspray can ruin the best of paint jobs, I'm masking off the back too. One down, 3 more to go, and we get to move into the booth. You know, the biggest problem with paint and chrome is adhesion. I mean, chrome is hard, and there's not a whole lot of materials out there that like to stick to it. I tell you, I've burned a lot of time and even more money trying to find a way to paint it and not have the material peel off. This stuff right here is the best that I have found. It's an AP01 adhesion promoter. Since I started using this and got a system down, I haven't had a single peeler. And that's saying a lot when you're painting over chrome. There's not a lot of tricks to laying this stuff down, but the one thing you do have to keep in mind is the simple fact that it's clear, as you probably noticed when I was pouring it into the gun. Now, you have to be real careful. Don't lay it on too thick, otherwise it'll actually delaminate. Just a nice, thin, even, like a medium wet coat is all you need. Now I'm using a DP90 sealer, which is a non-etching sealer. Now conventional wisdom would say to use an etch, but if you do that, it'll actually work against the AP01 that you've already laid down, and then you could run into some problems. After letting the AP01 dry for about 10 minutes, I'm laying down a single coat of the sealer. Something else that I wanted to let you guys in on. There's 2 reasons I'm using this little gun, the LPH80. Number 1, it's a lot smaller and easier to maneuver in and around these rims. Number 2, it's got a smaller tip on it because you really don't want a lot of buildup. You don't want a lot of mill thickness on there. It just makes it that much easier to chip. Now the sealer needs to dry for about 30 minutes. Then it's on to the base coat. I only need a single coat of base. After 20 minutes of dry time, I'm coming back with 2 coats of clear. Well, the rims are done, and not only do they look good, but they're gonna keep looking good for a lot of years and a lot of miles. And if you don't believe me, take a look at my orange Ford. I painted over the chrome front bumper on it about 4 years ago using the same process.
Welcome to Muscle Car. Today we're taking a break from Project Blue Collar Buick to bring back one of your favorites, Project Red Sled.
Now we've been picking away at the bodywork in all of our free time, and by the end of the show today, Red Sled will be red. This old 61 Impala 2-door sedan was in sad shape when it rolled in, but we braced up the X-frame, gave it some air ride, widened the tubs, patched up the sheet metal, and smoothed out the bumpers. Then we mocked up the 409 and 4-speed, got the bodywork knocked out, plumbed it up, and painted the wheels black. This car is going to be grabbing a lot of eyeballs when it rolls out of the booth in bright red. But before we tackle the paint, there's a little detail that we need to take care of.
We're putting in buckets in place of the bench seat, so we need a console. Really couldn't find one for the direction we're heading with the interior, so we're going to fab up our own.
Now we want our console to look like it actually belongs in the car, so our design is going to mimic the factory body lines. There's all kinds of stuff you can incorporate into a console, like a shifter, an armrest, storage, gauges, controls, but we're going to keep ours simple and just go with a shifter and a storage compartment.
I'm starting by finding the center of the car and estimating the right height for the console. I'm bending some 1/4-inch rod to make a jig that I'll shape the rest of the console around. Heating the rod not only makes it easier to work with, you can make tighter, more controlled bends. With two identical pieces formed, I'll tack them in place to form the general shape of the console. Once I've got it tweaked to the perfect shape, these cross braces will keep it that way and give it some support. After transferring the dimensions to a piece of 20 gauge steel, I'm using some electric shears to cut out the top piece and 10 snips to trim up the corners. You might expect an expensive slip roller to get this part done, but I'm using good old garage technology instead. Some scrap tubing, clamps, and body hammer are all you need. I'll use a template every now and then to check my progress. Don't get too slap happy here. If you go too far, you can distort the steel, which can be a pain to fix. With the top panel looking good, I can move on to the sides. This template will help me get the side panel shaped to the floor. The shear slices out the main shape. Then I'll go back and do some fine tuning with the 10 snips. The new Mittler Brothers bead roller is a pleasure to use. The bead I'm forming on the side panels resembles the body lines on the car and will give the console the matching look we're going for. A few quick tacks working from one end to the other helps lay these panels in nice and flat. I'm forming the corners out of flat steel, using a hammer and dolly to shape them, then trimming them to fit. Some tacks and a massage with a hammer finishes off the corner. That's the basic shape for our console, but it's missing something, a place for the shifter. We could just cut a hole, but Red Sled deserves something far more cool, so I'm going to fab up a panel to help doll it up a bit. I've been waiting on a chance to show off our planishing hammer. It's not a tool we use every day, but there's no replacement for it on a job like this. It's used to create complex curves, and with the help of a bag and hammer, an unlimited number of shapes can be achieved. I'm welding the shifter panel to the underside of my metal masterpiece, then slicing out the top section to reveal the results of several hours of work. A few passes with the grinder dresses up the edges. All it needs now is a hole in it for the shifter, and it'll be ready for some paint. Speaking of some paint, while I'm finishing up the welding on this thing, Rick's gonna get the body in the booth and spray on some color to help old Red Sled live up to its name.
The Impala's been through a lot since we bodyworked it. It's been primed, blocked, re-primed, blocked again, undercoated, masked up, and sealed. The time has finally come to get some color down in this dude. And we're using GM's Torrid Red. It's a color seen on late model GTOs. So hang on to your eyeballs, because we're about ready to go from white to out of sight. I'm using a Nest Iwata's latest gun, the LS400. It's a Pininfarina design, so it's not only ergonomic, she's sexy. The fluid tip is a 1.3, but it is available in different sizes. The first thing I noticed when I cracked the throttle is the consistency of the pattern, no matter what width you have it set at. So this thing would be perfect for spraying pearls, candies, or just about any high-end finish.
Imagine that. Red Sled's red.
After 3 coats of base with flash time in between, I'll make the whole thing shiny with PPG's 2021 Clear, sent over from Auto Body Color and Supply. I'm starting with a medium wet coat, then after letting it flash, I'll come back for 2 full wet coats.
Later in the show, Rick uses some custom paint techniques to give Red Sled some flair.
Hey guys, welcome back. Now from the factory, the accent stripes on these Impalas were white, but hey, this isn't exactly a numbers matching restoration. It's a resto mod, so we're going black. I got it all prepped out and masked up, so let's do this. This is PPG's 1683 black toner. It can be tricky to get good coverage with black, especially over red or bright colors, but 3 coats will make sure no base color shows through. Now with a car as unique as Red Sled, well, custom little details like that center console really help crank up the cool factor. We're going to continue along with that theme and add some custom graphics to those black inserts. Now you probably noticed we welded up all the holes for the factory emblems. Well, there's a reason for that. I'm going to paint them back on using a series of custom techniques that's going to make the new logos pure Red Sled. The process starts with a vinyl stencil. We had this one made at a local sign shop using an image designed by our graphic artist. Once the stencil is carefully laid in place, I'll mask off the surrounding area. After analyzing the design, I start removing the pieces of the stencil where the first color is going to go. I'm putting a small amount of white in the airbrush first. I've pre-mixed and reduced all the colors beforehand, just to save time once I get rolling. Keeping the spray pattern light and tight and slowly building up the color, well, it makes it a lot easier to find the edges of the stencil as things progress. With the checkers completely covered, I can unmask a little more for the next layer. Since this is a gravity feed airbrush, I can clean it between colors with nothing more than a cup of lacquer thinner and a paper towel. This next layer is the same white, just with a drop of black mixed in for a subtle gray. I'm being careful not to cover up the white I've already laid down, or I'll lose the contrast. Now, some areas of the stencil need to be recovered between coats. Masking tape and a steady hand to get the job done. With the first colors protected, I can move on to the center of the logo and the lettering. When planning out a graphic, it's really important to have a game plan in your head before you start, or you could end up with a big old mess. Now this is a relatively simple design, but they can get pretty complicated. It's a good idea to do a test panel before you tackle the real thing. That way you have an idea of what works and what doesn't. To recreate the look of chrome, I want a slightly uneven break in the color along the center of the emblem. Now to get this done, I'm tearing a sheet of contact paper to make a mask with a rough edge. After a 10-minute dry time, I can carefully unmask it. A few strategically placed shadows add some realistic detail. And that's it. No one's gonna mistake Red Sled for just any old 61 Impala, not with our custom faux chrome emblems on the side. Now all I have to do is clear it and unmask it, but for this week, we're out of time. So until next time, we're out of here.
Welcome to Muscle Car. Our 61 Impala project is coming together for the last time. So we're gonna break out the Loctite and cinch everything down for good.
Now Red Sled's already been mocked up a few times, so the body should drop right on. Now once it's there, we can hook up the steering, build all the clutch linkage.
Last time we built a wicked custom console, got some eye-popping color on it.
Imagine that, Red Sled's red.
And tagged its tail with the Red Sled logo. Now we can finally drop the shell onto the frame.
Now from the factory, our car was a column shift automatic, but we're adding a third pedal and putting 4 on the floor. Now whatever clutch linkage we come up with, it's gonna have to work around our pedal assembly and our steering components. So we'll get that stuff put in first. Nobody's making these pedal assemblies, but Springfield Auto Recyclers gave us a set from their huge stock of hard-to-find parts. It didn't come with any mounting hardware or linkage, so it's time to build some stuff, starting with column braces. This I Did It stainless steering column is designed to be adapted to almost any vehicle. A couple of handmade straps will keep it in place. Next come the universal joints and steering shaft from Borgeson. The upper U-joint is rubber isolated to reduce vibration in the column. With the steering assembled, I can build the clutch linkage. The pivot ball goes in first, followed by the Z-bar. I made a mounting bracket out of 1/8" plate to hold the other end. The only real trick in making this plate is to give yourself enough clearance between the Z-bar and the mount to allow the pivot ball to drop in and adjust correctly. Look at that, looks like I jammed. The original clutch rod from the pedal to the Z-bar had been chopped off with a torch, so I'll extend it out and make it adjustable with some more salvaged metal. People always give me a hard time, so I hate throwing junk out, but this is why. I used the old U-bolts from the rear end off our 71 Cuda to build most of the linkage on this thing. They were still good, so I didn't throw them out, and guess what? I used them. Now this piece is gonna go into the bottom of the linkage, and I even built a little pin here. It's gonna drop through the back, through the bottom of the linkage, and this right here is actually gonna actuate our clutch fork. We should be dialed. Now using these same basic concepts, you can design and build the clutch linkage for almost any vehicle. With our master cylinder on, our pedal assembly is done. Well, other than coming back and maybe beautifying our linkage a little bit. We still need to assemble all of our brake lines, but before we do that, we need to get our wheel wells on. We'll be doing that right after the break.
Up next, Red Sled's rad remote-controlled air ride.
That's right. welcome back. Like Rick said earlier, we need to get the inner fenders hung to finish plumbing the brake line. That means the door's got to go on, then the fender, and then finally the inner fender. The body slipped on pretty easy, and we're hoping our luck holds out with the rest of the panels.
Red Sled looks sweet with some sheet metal on her, and we can start to get an idea of what she'll look like cruising into her first car show. Now, of course, she looks a whole lot better lowered, and up until this point, we've been using ball valves to air it up and down. But now that the chassis and the body are united, we can install the lines and the rest of the air ride system.
Air Ride Technologies AirPod makes installation easy by combining the tank, compressor, valves, and electronics in one unit. Just simply run some air lines, power and control panel leads, and you're done. For easy access, we're mounting ours here in the trunk. Air Ride suspension uses plastic air brake tubing. There's a couple of things you need to know before you start your installation. One thing is to make sure your cut ends are nice and square. If they're cut at an angle, they won't seal or seat properly. You can use a razor blade, but a tubing cutter makes things a lot easier and faster. Also use push-to-connect fittings. They're easy to use, and if you ever need to remove a line, just simply push that collar in, tube slides right out. All compressors make noise, but mounting it with some rubber isolators will keep it to a minimum. The AirPod uses 1/4-inch lines, and to keep the chassis clean, we're running them inside the frame rail. If the fitting is hard to get to, pre-marking the hose will make it easier to tell when it's fully seated. Make sure to keep the hoses away from any moving suspension parts, or you'll end up with a torn line. We're not quite ready for wiring yet, so I rigged up a battery to test everything out. This control panel plugs right in, and we'll run it up front when the interior goes in. This controller is pretty cool. It's got presets to let you lay it out, set it to a perfect ride height, or lift it all the way up at the touch of a button. The AirPod even comes with a key fob, so you can stand back and watch it do its thing. That's right. Hey, welcome back. While Rick's been chopping away at the taillights on the Buick, I've just about got the wiring installed on Red Sled. I've done all I can do for now, so I thought I'd get the glass installed before the interior goes in it. We're planning on putting new glass in, but no one makes this huge back glass, so we're gonna have to reuse it. The problem is, it doesn't look so great. It's a 50-year-old piece, so it's well worn and has a few scratches, but we can fix it with the right materials.
Build on a budget. Muscle car projects that save you time and money.
Many imperfections can be sanded and polished out, like wiper scrapes, scratches, and haze. Eastwood's glass polishing kit can save you some serious dough if you're trying to decide whether to replace or refurbish a rare piece of glass like ours. I've got the glass nice and clean, so I'm ready to tackle the scratch. If your fingernail catches on it, it's too deep for the polish and will need sanding. I'm marking the scratch on the underside of the glass so I can keep track of where it is. Starting with the coarsest of Eastwood's 3-disc, spray on some water and use a DA to start smoothing out the area of the scratch. Once you can't feel it anymore with your fingernail, move on to the medium disc, then finish it with the fine disc. Make sure to keep the area nice and wet with a spray bottle as you work, or you could damage the glass. Once the scratch is completely gone, use the rhodite compound and buffing attachment to polish out the surface of the entire window. Fine scratches and haze don't need to be sanded at all. They can be buffed out along with the rest of the glass. That should do it. Let's see what we got. Get this compound off. Boy, I don't think it's bad at all. Shoot, no. Man, that looks good. Once all the scratches are sanded out, go back over the whole thing with the rhodite compound and polish it till it looks, well, like glass. This is a huge back glass, so I've got a lot more polishing to do. But we're all out of time, so until next week, y'all keep it between the ditches.
Hey guys, welcome back. Project Red Sled is looking a lot more like a completed car with a grille, glass, and some trim, but there's a major component that still needs to be addressed.
The interior. We're handing it over to some upholstery experts for that part of the build, but there's a few things that we got to take care of before we send it out.
Anything that the upholstery is going to cover up needs to be installed now. Otherwise, you'll just have to pull that brand new interior right back out. And this includes any wiring that goes to the back half of the car, along with the glass, the regulators, the latches and strikers, the trim, and finally, the seals. Since the latches aren't repopped, we took the originals and cleaned them up in the blaster. All the pivot points get a shot of lithium grease to make sure they work smooth for years to come. Since latches aren't any good without strikers, we cleaned those up too. Everything that I'm installing that's not an OEM part came straight from year one. It saves a lot of hassle when you can make one call and have so many hard-to-find items show up on your doorstep. All the stainless on the car, including the window trim, was restored to a show-winning shine by Advanced Plating in Nashville. The side trim attachment points are going to be hidden by interior panels, so even these need to go on before the interior goes in. And taking care of little details like this now, what's going to save us a whole bunch of hassles down the road.
The next time you see this old gal, she'll be sporting some slick new interior. But we've got to say bye to her for now. And we're all out of time, so until next week, y'all keep it between the ditches. Let's get this dude out of here.
Less gabbing, more pushing.
What? Man, you're rude.
Less gabbing, more pushing.
Today on Muscle Car, Project Red Sled is ready for her big finale. See what it takes to turn back the clock on a piece of muscle car history.
Hey guys, welcome to Muscle Car. Now, a lot of vehicles have gone through our shop, and some, as I'm sure you've noticed, have a tendency to stick around a little bit longer than others. Now, we knock out a few of them in just a couple of days, like a year one track car or the MagnaFlow Mustang. Now, others we transform in just a couple months, like Blue Collar Buick or the UFC Cuda.
And then there are those that have their way of hanging around for a while, like Altered Eagle. Now, some of y'all give us a hard time about these type of projects. But if you've ever tried to roll the clock back on a 50-year-old piece of Swiss cheese, you know it can't be done overnight. And that brings us to Project Red Sled.
Straight out of a cornfield. This poor thing was hanging around since the very first episode of Muscle Car. When we finally decided to roll it into the shop, we knew it was going to be our biggest challenge yet. But we didn't let that stop us. We got right to work blowing it apart, then cleaned up the X-frame and got busy adding some bracing.
We mocked up the air ride, strapped on the faux wheels, and stood back to watch it do its thing. Next, the frame got a layer of powder coat cause it's tough and beautiful. Back at the shop, the body got some major surgery, including new pans, wider tubs, patch panels, hammer and dolly work, and new braces.
We got some of the panels smoothed out, primered and test fitted, and checked the gaps before going any further. Time to drop in the heart of this project, our 500-horse Chevy 409, backed up by a 4-speed. The true test of our devotion came when we pulled the body back off and dedicated untold hours to the bodywork. This layer of filler primer was blocked, then we reprimed, blocked again, and sealed it up before we finally let the old girl live up to her name.
We each added our own custom touch, Rick with an airbrush emblem, and I fabbed up a one-off console. After taking care of a few more details and final assembly, it was ready to head out to the upholstery shop for the final phase of this total restoration.
Today, we can finally say the words that we've been waiting so long to hear. Project Red Sled is done. And here she is, looking 50 years younger, thanks to guys like Advanced Plating, Year One, and Dakota Digital.
Drenched in chrome, rolling on 22s, and sporting eye-popping paint and graphics, there's no danger of losing Red Sled in any crowd.
The Flowmaster exhaust snakes its way under a well-detailed chassis fed by a nitro-plated set of Doug's headers.
Lamar Walden's accessories and pulley set, along with Excess Power's compact battery, add the final details to our dual-quad 409. The last time you saw Red Sled, it was headed out for a major upholstery makeover. M&M Hot Rod Interiors is known for their custom work, and I thought it'd be cool to see how the pros would handle this kind of job. So I headed down to Alabama to take a look at the progress. Wayne and Pamela McGriff not only own M&M, they do a lot of the work too, and they were ready for Red Sled.
With dozens of high-profile builds under the belts, it's no wonder they were able to come up with a plan to make the interior as unique as the rest of the car.
Using the old panels as a guide, Pamela started making fresh ones out of aluminum. Meanwhile, Wayne worked on recovering our old bucket seats.
It takes true craftsmanship and a lot of patience to do what these guys do, and for everyone at M&M, it's a real labor of love.
And the results speak for themselves. They knocked this one out of the park with a look that's classy with a sinister edge. The Dakota Digital gauges give a modern twist while still blending in with the classic styling.
There's only two things missing now: a passenger and a driver.
Up next, Giddy Up 409. It's the big payoff for years of hard work.
We've all got a top 10 list of cars we want to drive, and high up on my list has always been a 409 4-speed Impala. Red Sled was born during a time when they weren't shy about chrome. Fins may have been on their way out, but 1961 marked a new direction for GM styling. Smooth and clean with plenty of eye candy.
And in case you're wondering how big her lungs are, once you crack open those 2.4s, it'll pass just about anything on the road.
It's kind of cool to finally be driving it.
You know, it is weird though. You think about all the work and stuff that goes into them, and then the actual joy of getting to drive it around, it kind of blurs all them memories and words. Your car rides good, man.
It does, dude.
For one reason, I'm not really worried about driving. I'm sitting too good to have to worry about driving. There was a pothole around.
Where? And this old girl's a cruiser. I'd love to take her to a car show, or better yet, an old drive-in movie theater.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I know where one's at, not too far from here if you want to check it out.
Oh, heck yeah. You mind if we pick up my girl? Nothing personal, dude, but I don't know if I want to sit in a dark car with you for 2 hours.
Nah, that's cool. Let's pick her up.
Right on.
Honey, this is so romantic. But where's Tommy?
No, that's all right, baby. Don't worry about Tommy. I gave him some food and water in a bowl.
What?
It's all right.